A few months ago, I was contacted by a very interesting company out of Silicon Valley called GoNimbly. And they said, this event is so interesting, we want to be part of it, and we want to bring our network and our knowledge to help you make this day great, and to help you talk people about one of the things that is, I think, bugging so many of us that work in large teams, but also in small. I know what I'm talking about. I work in a very small team, and we exactly face this problem right now that we're going to tackle. And this person was Jason. Jason is the CEO of GoNimbly, a company that helps other companies to work better together. And my job as a conference curator and journalist is to find interesting people and interesting stories that you can learn from. And one of my favorite moments is always when somebody comes and says, hey, I'm sitting on a trove of great people and great stories, let's just do something together. So thank you, Jason, for putting this together. And I'm so happy that two other super interesting companies also, can I say all the way from the West Coast? West Coast? Right.
Not that far.
Not that far. But definitely not from the core New York tech ecosystem, but from apart. Said, hey, we want to be part of this too. And Zac Stein, the COO of Lattice, is building an amazing company that is also helping people working better together. Welcome, Zac.
Thank you.
And because collaboration, the end of silos, and remote work has turned into somewhat of an educational thing at many companies, there is now people at companies that have the title of Chief Learning Officer or Learning Director or Director Learning and Development, which is Kari's title, which is she's doing at another fascinating company called Drift. Welcome, Kari.
Thank you.
My name is Felix Zeltner. I'm the co-founder of Work Awesome, and I sometimes do not work awesome, and I hope we're going to solve that with you guys. So let's go right into the middle of it. How siloed is your own company? I'll start, okay? How siloed are all our companies from 1 to 5? I'm at 4.5. What about Drift? What about you?
Is 5 very siloed?
5
and 1
is very siloed.
Okay.
1 is like, yeah, in the dreams.
2.25.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say 2 right now.
I'll say 3, even though I help companies unsilo.
Okay, interesting. So why do you have a silo while all you're working on is helping people to not have silos?
I think the idea of companies not being in silos, which we're going to go through in this panel, but the idea of not siloing is so anti what humans want to do every single day. We want to do good work. We are trained to do that work on our own from a very early age, and we really don't know how to collaborate and how to break those silos down organically, and because of that, it's very natural and easy to silo into what you think is the most productive version of yourself, even though in lots of cases there's a lot of waste there.
But like, I think that something that is always in the talks about silos, it's kind of a natural thing, right? You give me something to do, I give you something to do because we work together, and already we're in a silo, kind of. So what's so bad about silos when they're actually natural?
You're looking at me, so I can answer that question. It's going to happen because we're sitting so close to each other.
Yes.
I was actually thinking about this earlier when Priya said the thing. Somebody asked the question about fear, and she's like, well, you say, fear is bad, but it might also be good. So I think that, like, siloing maybe unintentionally versus, like, intentional cross-collaborative teams or intentional, like, we have a pod structure at Drift in our product organization that's very intentional. It has engineers on it, has a product designer, it has a product manager, it has a tech lead. Like, that's an intentional silo we've created. So I think it can be intentional and actually be good. So you probably have to, like, peel back the definition of the word a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I see. Now, Lattice is a company that grew from like 0 to 50 in what amount of time?
About 2 years.
About 2 years. So, like, when you look at that growth that you saw, like, what did you do to avoid silos?
Yeah. Well, I think to Kari's point, I put us at a 2, so I think that one of the things, especially when you're growing quickly, is that can happen, and it is sort of a natural mechanism. We gather, we're in tribes, but we want to do it intentionally. So I guess if you think about it from like a people process perspective, from a people perspective, we try to hire people who have really complementary skills and diverse interests, but really shared core values. And so like one of our values, for example, and this is like, there's a difference between sort of what I think of as aspirational values and like really core values. It should feel like, I like the analogy of like, removing a core value from a company is like separating a consciousness from a person, right? Like it should be part of you. And so for us, we call it shipmate self. And so that's the idea that like you put the well-being of the company ahead of others, and you put others' interests ahead of your own. And that's just so core to everything we do, that it, I think, has helped us as we've grown, although we're 50 people. So we're still small and have avoided much of the growing pains you see later stage.
You're like pointing to Kari
I'm
again.
pointing to Kari because Kari and I were chatting before, and like
Right.
Drift is deep in it right now.
I mean,
yeah.
you're in pain. Why are you in pain? 50 to 250, I think, is the growth that you have seen. But you have seen like another planet because you worked at Amazon before. So how's that experience for you right now, seeing the 50 to 250 thing? And how does it relate to Zac?
Right, yeah, we were talking about Amazon before. It's almost, I kind of grew up in my career in Amazon, so it's kind of the not normal, right? I onboarded 2,000 managers a year. It was insane. So, but at Drift, I joined in March. I've been there 9 months, and we were around 100 people, and we're at like 250 right now. And so to grow from 100 to 250 in a matter of months is really insane. And I think probably, I mean, it's similar pains you feel. I just think it becomes more exponential. And what's been really, I don't know that you asked this, but I'm going to answer it. Like, what's been really important for us is like, so how have we like maintained, our collaborative culture? How have we maintained that 2 or 2.25, whatever I said? I think it's been, we've really defined what matters to us, because you have to have anchors to like anchor the organization around shared values. So that's one of the first things I did when I came on, is define what we call leadership principles. Which are really like our anchoring operating principles. And then we've also established rituals that we have as a team. Every Monday we do a team stand-up, the entire company. Every Friday we come together as a team and talk about the work we delivered that week, all of us. And so we've maintained those rituals as we've grown and things like that, so that we can, even if you don't know everybody's name, because that kind of breaks around 150, you can still have these kind of practices and beliefs that you're in together as a group. And so then when you break off into those intentional silos or smaller groups, it operates kind of at that small team size in that way there. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
There's actually reasons why people silo, and they're pretty obvious. One is highly degree, like specialty skills within an organization leads to siloing, right? So if you have a company that thinks that, our engineers can't talk to our design team, right? Because they don't speak the same specialty language. That leads to a siloing. But the other one, the two main ones, are you don't have a flat organization, so reporting structure becomes diluted. And so people silo to who they know can get their job done for them. And then 2, they don't have the core metric that everyone can align on. So things like shared meeting culture, or all of these things that you can build at the company level and then take those onto the team level, will allow those teams to function productively without siloing. Right? Because the main question is, people sometimes go, well, people have to silo to do work, which I'm completely against that idea, and I don't actually think that's true. But I think that what we need is time to do deep work where we are working with people that can help us achieve our goals. But that kind of starts at the very top of how you build, really at the very bottom of your organization, then how you scale it.
But you work with organizations that have hundreds of thousands of employees, like Amazon that you mentioned. What do you do when it's already too late?
Yeah, so at GoNimbly, what we are the first revenue operations consulting company. And what that actually means is that we go in and are part of internal operations teams for tech companies, or we augment their teams, usually because they have a skill gap, right? That's the way consulting companies always get into you, is you have a skill gap on your team. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is teach people that what you really want is an army of generalists, all motivated around one core value. And for GoNimbly, because we work on the operations of SaaS companies, it's revenue, right? So the core value is revenue, how do we, not value, but metric, how do we organize around that? And you'll actually see that a lot of what we call vanity metrics, like open rates in email and other things like that, just kind of fall away when you look at those kind of core ideas. And so we can transform organizations because it's actually what the leadership cares about to begin with. All these other silos build their own things they care about to justify their existence, and very quickly you can kind of pull everyone together to look at how and why they're actually showing up to work every day. And I think that's kind of the key for transformation.
Kari, the onboarding part, it seems to be like super crucial. How do you deal with that as a director of learning and development? What have you changed? What have you maybe learned from Amazon that you're now doing?
Yeah, I think onboarding is so key in general, just like bringing and assimilating people into an organization, especially if you're going fast. To think that since I've worked at Drift, I've onboarded 60% of the company is insane. Like, I hope I'm getting it right because. And so in the same at Amazon, we were really intentional about onboarding and really focusing on a couple things, which is like getting people into kind of that belief system as fast as possible. So how do you build like programming and structure around making sure that people understand like this is how we work, this is what's expected of you. And so for onboarding at Drift, something that we do that's very, very practical, but related to like the idea of no silos. So at Drift, we have this kind of tap on the shoulder culture, and a lot of people think that's a bad thing. Like, you can just go up to anybody and kind of ask them for anything. There's no like approval, there's no chain you have to go through. And we actually want to maintain that as long as we can. And so for new hires, when they come in, we do some of the core stuff in the morning that we have to get out of the way. And then in the afternoon, I actually put them to work to go learn about the business, go learn about our metrics, about our product, and they go learn about it, and then they come back and teach each other. And I give them like no structure. I'm like, you just need to go literally tap on people's shoulders and find out about stuff and then come back and teach each other. And so we do this kind of teaching exercise. And so that sounds really simple, but it's huge. One, because I'm making them do the learning and teaching themselves, which is a like L&D hack. Two, it also then gets them in that mode of like, oh, it's safe here to do this. And I don't have to go ask the head of product to talk to somebody in product. I can just literally go talk to anybody in product.
Can you name an example of what would you teach me maybe if I'm new to Drift?
Yeah, so that we actually kind of break down for that afternoon exercise I'm talking about. We break down kind of 4 components of the business. We do like we want everybody to go find out about like our core business metrics, our teams, how we're structured, how we measure success. We want them to find out about our product. We want them to find out about our customers. And I should have said that one first. Our customers, like what's our ideal customer profile? How does our customer team work? And then we want them to kind of find out about like how we work and communicate and collaborate as a team. So I literally like give them very broad topics and assignments, and then they have to go out and just bug people and talk to them and then come back and teach their fellow new hires. So they've been there for 2 hours and they have to do this.
Almost feels like you know what the teaching is. Do you find unique insights in that?
Myself personally?
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of fun for me because I get to see, every other Monday, I get to see like new hires' perspective to come in and, yes, they all kind of say the same thing. So I'm there for quality control, right? If they say something and it's like totally grossly off, I get to be like, well, actually, that's not right. But what I find is really cool because we have that open collaborative culture that like most often every time the information coming back that they've gone and gotten from existing team members is accurate and consistent. So that's really cool. That like every other Monday I send 10 people out into like our ecosystem and they come back with kind of the same sense of information.
Mm-hmm. Our work is getting more and more distributed, and I think your companies are no example. We had this topic here on the stage a lot today. How in the world are we going to deal with remote work when it comes to focus, when it comes to email, and how do you deal with this when it comes to silos? Because the most siloed, I would assume, is the remote worker, first of all. Maybe for you, Jason.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we didn't talk about is in order to be a well-operated company, you have to have 4 skills across your team. And the first one is operations or strategy, right? And this is, I think, why I invited Jay Zac. He's the COO of a growing company. You need to have tools. So I think I heard a lot of people talking about tools today. You need to have enablement. So how are you going to train and really put this message out there? And you're going to have insights so that you are essentially feeding back into that cycle, right? And it's a reciprocal cycle. And what's really important about that is that if you can nail those 4 skills within your organization, you should do a skill gap of finding out where your organization's weak. Ultimately, what you can drive to is it doesn't matter where people work or how they work or when they work, you can have a highly operated company. And I think that so many organizations don't focus on those 4 core skills of their organization, right? And so remote culture usually falls down on you give them all the tools, you tell them what to do, which is the strategy, and then you do no enablement and you do no insights on those people, right? And so when you find that you're doing that, what ends up happening is your remote workers are missing 2 parts of what makes a functional company exist. And ultimately, you can sometimes lead an organization into peril, especially because you might have very, very strong remote employees who could be contributing a lot to your organization, not really being maximized. So I think those are the things you kind of have to understand. It's easier to fill in those gaps, or at least put, what's it called, when you spackle a wall, right? When people are in the same office and they're getting the company culture to fill gaps that exist in your organization. But you really need to understand that your remote employees aren't going to feel that.
Let's set a concrete example, like how, as a chief operations officer, how do you organize remote work?
Well, I will say that I've dealt with that in the past, and we don't at Lattice. That's probably an unpopular answer. I didn't actually know remote work was in the title of this panel. We were joking about that, but I'll tell you why first. Why we don't do it at Lattice right now. So part of that is because I think that the term intentionality is really important. And right now, when we're doubling headcount at our company year over year, the context does happen in the hallway. And also, we're doing a QBR with a customer coming back, and that CSM is talking to the CTO and the head of product, and we're thinking through the product implications of that and changing those things in live time. And that's just hugely valuable to us. We're also at a number small enough that we'll be able to find great people in San Francisco and continue to do that work. I will say in my past job, we had both remote work, and then my team was split, 250 people in Arizona and 250 people in San Francisco, and it was a ton of work. Like when you think about career pathing, when you think about leadership, when you think about managing compensation and compensation bands, when you think about just general corporate communication and decision-making structures. So you can do it, but you really want to be intentional. And so as a leader, I think you have a responsibility to constantly be simplifying, like in the same way that a PM of a product that's growing and moving up market has to constantly fight complexity within a product. I think that executives and leaders have to constantly simplify within their organizations. And I think remote work, sometimes the juice is sometimes worth the squeeze, but when that moment comes, you have to really be ready to invest in doing it right and keeping those people engaged.
Yeah, I think one thing I want to say about remote work is a lot of times businesses do it because it's a cost savings. We can get X resources in this environment because it's cheaper. I think that's totally the wrong reason to do it. Right? Because you actually have to invest more in those hubs and in those areas where you're trying to do remote. I think a lot of times people forget that because it's so interesting to say, well, it's 20% less in this particular market. We can get great talent. There's a college nearby, whatever. And then the team never puts the real time and effort into building that culture.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I think Amazon probably breaks that. Amazon breaks a lot of rules for my world, but when it's it's 80 cents on the dollar, there's no thought of are those people problem solving to think how are we 20% more productive, or and reducing case volume by 30% over the next year, or also just how are we making sure that everyone is communicating and in the same room and traveling and all the rest of it, that sort of the latency of that remote work gets lost.
And how do people react when you tell them remote's not an option?
Well, we tell people before they come we're transparent about it up front. Now, of course, for the sake of simplicity, I said we don't do remote work. I cheated a little because we have 3 or 4 people who are OG Latticians, we call ourselves Latticians, and they for personal reasons have had to move, and so we've been accommodating to that. But in general, we're trying to kind of keep things as simple as possible, and I think there are a lot of great places for people who want to work remote to work, and I encourage them to go do that, and we just happen to not be one of those places.
Kari, I think you wanted to say something?
I'm skipping back a little bit, but I was just thinking about the idea of it's cheaper, doing it because it's cheaper. So I think about model that we had at Amazon. Amazon, does have like a remote workforce for some roles, but even just how distributed their teams were, and they had to put a ton of money behind that and to solve for the things that they were just talking about. Like how do you make sure people are connected to the team, understand the culture. So to go back to onboarding, I did onboarding at Amazon for a couple years with the operations team. And we flew every single person that started, and this is like 40 to 50 people every single week for basically the entire year until Christmas season, to a central location to onboard. That's so much money. And so it costs so much money to do things like that. And so I just wanted to kind of add on that it's not always the cheaper option, and being able to like look at the full impact of making that choice. And, to Jay Zac's point, like, is it worth the squeeze or whatever you said? Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Weird
And maybe one more thing. Is there one thing today that still helps you that you learned at Amazon, especially when it comes to not keeping up, like not taking the rules that Zac talked about? Not staying within the rules, that you're like disrupting things?
Oh gosh.
Or is this?
That's kind of, I don't know how, that's such a broad question. There's so much. I would say, I think the biggest thing about Amazon, and maybe it's related to this, is just the scrappiness of everybody there, which is such a buzzword in like startup world. But I think just the idea of, so if I think about the distributed teams and them being able to work cross-project and come together with a group of 30 people on a project team you've never met and stand up an operations warehouse in 3 weeks, you can do that through really being really, really scrappy. I don't know if anybody here has ever like worked at Amazon. I'm sure most of you ordered from them. That company is held together by like duct tape, bubble gum, and like children's wishes. That's what I always say. So people always think that it's like really shiny and sexy behind the scenes, and it's not. Like, it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of like piecing things together. And so I don't know if that's like relevant to this topic, but it ties in somehow, I'm sure.
How do you build the culture of inclusion when you have remote teams? John is asking, why our app?
Culture of inclusion. I think it's by setting these sort of standards like we were talking about. You were talking about your Monday meeting. We also have something that we do every week, which is an on deck where we present back to the team something that someone's working on or a topic. And then we have a retrospective weekly that we call Win, Learn, Change, where people are actually self-reflecting in front of people. The challenge with that is that once you get to a certain size, you can't do that with, everyone gets 5 minutes. So once you're 100 people, you can't have a meeting like that. So then you have to break down into silos. And then what's important about that is then you rotate those people so that you get the perspective of everyone in the company. I think, it's all about, and I love this word when we talked about it earlier, intentionality within what you do. You should not treat your remote employees any different than you would treat any other employee. And if you look at yourself, you are. Right? Most people are treating them differently. The amount of face-to-face time they get, the amount of coffee dates, just kind of random stuff that happens. And all of that is about the human connection that makes us connected to our work and want to essentially push towards a North Star metric that the company cares about. I think that's, when I talk to remote employees at big organizations, we work with very big SaaS companies, one of the key things for them is they just don't feel included. And that seems so easy to solve, but in reality it's probably the most difficult thing to solve because they don't have an intrinsic why. They don't have a friend in the office they come see every day. They don't have that shepherd that's carrying them through the process. So you have to be that person. And if you are in a place where you think remote work is important to your organization, again, just take it very seriously and do the work, because it is work.
And maybe to dive into these questions, like, are there engaging rituals that you can do working with people remotely? It's like 2 questions here that dive into that.
I mean, I'll kind of try to stack those questions. So I think right now, I'll just use a recent example. So like, we have an engineer who, for family reasons, had to move to Barcelona. So first off, the stand-up is done at a time, the daily stand-up, when he can make that call. The second thing is, at the end of the day, our tech lead on the pod that he is on always writes him an email summarizing the work that's been done and helping try to prep him for his day. And then from a ritualistic perspective, twice a year we have company offsites that it doesn't matter what geography you're in, you're there. and then he comes and spends 2 weeks in the office, kind of at the quarter breaks in between. And so I think that for us, we're just trying to create some consistency around those things. But when I really like what you just said around like you treat people differently even though you don't think you do. And so I think that one of the things that is awkward to people in both larger organizations as well as organizations where there are remote workers is that you have to repeat yourself constantly and just be saying the same thing over and over again. And I think that you have to think of remote workforces almost like you do a different just core important constituency of your group that you're like kind of continuously helping socialize, engage with, and explain what's happening at the company.
I think something that you said before this panel, that remote work, people think it's freedom, but it's actually the heaviest planning.
Yeah, it takes a lot of planning. People don't underestimate planning and operations of that kind of stuff. For us, one thing that we've done is if you've been to San Francisco, live in it, rent is very expensive. But we rented a corporate apartment, and all of our remote employees can come in at any point in time they want to. So having a culture where they can come to us instead of us chasing them, and they know that, and they do. They take advantage of it. They come and they spend a week in the office. They go away. They feel recharged. They do 6 weeks of productive work where they're remote work consultancy. So for that, they're sometimes remote, right? And they have to be with customers or wherever the customers want them to be. So I think that's an important part of what we did ritualistically.
What would you share any rituals?
Well, maybe less rituals. Just as you all are talking, I'm thinking like the thing we haven't talked about is the people that are going to impact the effectiveness of this. There's process and there's all that, but it's your managers. So how are your people managers at dealing with different types of workforce, especially if their team is split between part remote and part whatever? So we all hear the story. People don't leave jobs; they leave managers, and so that's true. It's true. Everybody here could think of a manager that you were like, ugh. So really, I think investing in that kind of front line, the person that's going to be touching them the most and making the decisions about how do I communicate with them every day to make sure they feel connected, how do I make sure they have what they need, like your managers are going to be the ones doing that. So I think investing in that resource.
Mm-hmm. When we think about trying to do an outlook, and we just had one audience question here saying, what is a silo even? Everybody says it's probably something different. So maybe you want to give me your definition of a silo, but also maybe trying to attempt a bold outlook and say, are we really looking at the end of silos, or actually at beginning? Are we actually looking at the beginning of new silos as work is getting so distributed?
I don't know if I have an answer to the second part. That's like kind of meta for me. But the first one, what is a silo? Just what came up for me with that is, I think it's any sort of environment that you have where somebody says, oh, that's not my job, that's that person's job over there. And that there's so much in that language choice there, and even the finger pointing was intentional. So I think when you hear things like that, you might have silos. So, oh, well, that broke because of that team. You lose a sense of you lose a sense of shared purpose around a customer. I think that's a very broad definition, but that's how I would define it.
Go ahead.
Well, for me, it's, I think to understand anything, you have to go back to the origin of it. And so there's a story of this guy who worked for Goodyear Tires, and he traveled around, and they all worked differently. And his job was to try to get Goodyear Tires to work the same. And he couldn't do it. Every region was different for the reasons I mentioned around specialization and skill. And he named it called the silo syndrome. And he did this in the late 80s. He died in 2018, spending the rest of his career trying to solve this problem. So it's not something that's new, and it's not something that's going to just go away. But I think where we are, for where my company is I think there are smart ways to organize your company from the very beginning and scale all the way through that will have a real revenue impact to how your company performs, and thus it's worth the investment, right? And I think that's the case. That reason why I'm even on the panel or doing this stuff is because people need to understand that there is real value in investing that's not just people feeling good, which is important, and being happy, but there is actually a corporate benefit to organizing successfully and eliminating the silos. As what a silo is. A silo is an organization that puts its own unit in front of the, right? And I think that, you can't have a relationship in life where you're putting yourself before the relationship, right? And I think of businesses the same way, where if every organization has to justify its own existence, then no one feels psychologically safe to push the business forward. And I think that's really, really important to what silos are and how to break them down.
Zac, do you want to attempt an outlook on the future of siloing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think that I will just say that I think we're clearly talking about it in an organizational context. I feel like your question might have like moved past the organization to a more meta point, right? Which is like, yes, I think that the kind of, to me, there's this like common thread throughout all the definitions, which is this like idea of isolation, right? And so I do think that I kind of believe that culturally, you could argue that there are a lot of factors that are leading to greater isolation as individuals and as a community. So yes, that my outlook is unfortunately not super optimistic there. Although, you know, at any point in time, I feel like the outlook tends to be not super optimistic. I will also say that I just like to take the contrarian perspective on silos for a minute. Like, I do think that there are moments or reasons for a company to isolate and and to pay that cultural cost, like kind of for the benefit of the broader organization. And so there's sort of this there's a first order consequence, which is the isolation and cultural hit, but the second order consequence is like, you know, for example, like shipping a really, really great product and not having to like go through all of the decision rights within a functionally organized unit. Or, you know, there's a reason why Google X exists as kind of a silo within Google. And so just by like kind of creating strong community and harmony within that smaller group, there's real external consequences to that, but sometimes there are benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing you're hitting on, if we're working with a very large company, one of the answers might be you need to break your teams down into smaller teams. And they might go, well, isn't that just siloing? And it's like, no, it's giving them all the same metric, all the same thing to push them forward. So I think that sometimes people get confused between the idea that everybody in a large company, like we're in SAP's building, right, is all doing the same thing, and everyone wakes up and is driving the boat in the same direction. But it's actually more about what goal they're trying to achieve, and if you can align everyone to that goal. So I think that's an important point. I think that we spend most of our time at work. So I'm optimistic that if we solve this in the workplace, we can solve it in other places. So I'll take the opposite approach of that.
We solve what at the work?
Solve silos in the workplace and how we break those down, then we can sort of take that into our real life because we'll have a lot of practice.
Interesting. I'll just dive back into the questions for one more. One thing that came up here was how do you? Sorry. So there was a question. Is it okay to hire locally, or is it better to hire locally, even if it's more expensive? I think that was kind of the question here. So it's about kind of like going back from remote towards the end of the panel and saying, okay, is the future of work more local than it's ever been?
Well, my take on this, and I'm sure everyone my take is, what is expensive? Right? So like, now you could say, oh, well, come on. Like, we're talking brass tacks, we're talking dollars and cents of a salary. And my response to that is, I think that particularly now that we're like no longer, you know, like packing widgets and we're in a knowledge economy, like great people have an outsized multiplicative impact. And so having the best people is more important than ever before.
Yeah, I almost think I don't want to like offend whoever asked this question, but it's almost like the wrong question. You know what I mean? Like it's more like, what kind of people do you want in your organization? Where are those people? What type of structure do you need to build in your teams to attract them, make them successful there? It's more about that than it is. I mean, I get the dollars matter too, but I don't know. I'd almost like switch the question on its head a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So I think when we look at this, we're somewhere in a big shift that is happening, and to me it's just fascinating to see that the remote work has become like a conundrum that is impacting everything, and that even the end of the end of the work as we know it and as we're discussing it here is what all of you try to grow and try to work on. Is there anything that for the end wrapping up, is there anything that you, I think, wanted to say or wanted to get out there, wanted to share with the audience that we maybe haven't touched on when it comes to siloing and the future of teamwork, as might be the better title?
I think I was talking to Zac earlier, so I'm just going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about camp. Because we kind of talked about it earlier, but one of the really cool things we started to do at Drift, you kind of mentioned rituals, and I think this goes back to like investing in time for your team. I invented this thing last year called Camp Drift. Last year it was in August. I don't know. I work at a fast-growing company. I don't have a sense of time. And we actually have a company kickoff coming in January, and we use both of these. I think you also mentioned coming together twice a year. We use both of these times not to like talk about metrics and not to like, here's our goals. We do a little bit of that at the kickoff, but we actually like totally disconnected and did a technology-free event at summer camp. We took everybody literally to a summer camp this summer. And so we do things like that as a team because we care about people connecting to each other and understanding each other, kind of like we did this morning. Because then when you go back into the office, and part of our team sits in San Francisco and part of our team sits in Seattle. So when we have things like that, even if it's just twice a year, as long as we can maintain that, when you go back to dispersing, no matter what your dispersing looks like, there's just something that's happened there in terms of connection, in terms of relationship, and in terms of belonging and understanding each other on a personal level. When you've one with your Color Wars team. We had Color Wars teams at camp. For anybody that grew up going to camp, you understand Color Wars is, okay, I see a hand pump in the back. That's good. We have Color Wars teams that people were in these Color Wars teams and they still talk about it. It's 3 months later and they're like, oh, let's go red team. And those people sit in all different offices or in all different kinds of teams. And so create experiences like that. You have to get creative, and maybe it isn't camp or maybe it isn't flying everybody to one place, but how can you create experiences where people can get connected in a way similar to what we've been talking about this morning. So that's all I think I want to talk about.
Well,
I like camp. Well, I was, when you sent out who was in the audience, which I think is basically me. Hi. Well, we're all very different, but I was like, what do I wish? So I want, there's a story where it was very simple, but I was at an exec offsite and the chief people officer drew, he was like, if I asked all of you who was on your team, you would say your direct reports. And he drew a circle, and he's like, this is your team. And just drew another circle. And I know it's extremely basic, but I think it was very resonant with me because from my perspective, what happens elsewhere in an organization is going to echo forward from the executive team. And a lot of that kind of infrastructure and architecture is done by the people team, but leaders need to behave in a way. And I think that if leaders aren't kind of optimizing for their local maxima and are thinking globally and helping one another out, the company itself will end up being healthy.
Yeah, one thing I'll just chime in on that too, because I totally agree. We talk a lot about our leadership team at our company, and I think it's really interesting how fast people move to protecting down or protecting up and not protecting across and not really caring for one another in that way. I think there's a lot of things. One of the things that you mentioned about remote work is I think that remote work is good. It's fine, hiring people everywhere. It's a global economy, I get it. But why did you do that? And I think that's the thing that you always have to ask yourself. Why did you make this mean? Why are you sending people to camp? And if the answer is vanity driven, you are not going to create a healthy culture with that, right? And I think we have to be really honest about what vanity means. And vanity in a corporation sense means, are we doing this for protecting our own perception internally or externally, or are we doing this because we're trying to change the people we work with? And if we're trying to change the people we work with, there's really no wrong first step. There's no wrong way to go. And I think that people need to lean in on that a little bit more and try to do things that are really engaging at a personal level, one-to-one relationship with everyone they work with.
We have time for one more question. Got upvoted from Jessica. And I think it adds to what you just said. What if you want people to not embrace the current culture, but change/influence it instead? How do you onboard for that? I guess that goes to you, Kari. Or
Sure. Culture is made by how you act. It's not by how someone tells you, right? So I think the most interesting thing is we can talk about company values, but they're only values if that's the way the company behaves. Otherwise, people just go like, this is not real, and they just get it on their onboarding, and then they put it away in a desk drawer, and they never think about it again. But if you're intentional about how you behave, and you can show people that the way you behave has a consequence, and hopefully a positive consequence, I think people will want to follow you. I don't really believe that you can't change leadership. And I know that's like a touchy-feely answer, and I'm not a very touchy-feely guy, but I think what you really need to be doing is be thinking about what am I doing every day that I can habitualize and show others that if they also follow this walk, they will get a better outcome, because that's what people care about.
Zac?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about it. I think it's a really good question. So first off, I hope that the people that you're hiring represent the values that you want, like, kind of embedded in the future organization. And that itself can be hard given hiring committees and the logistics of it. So I think that sometimes, first off, I think that you have to authentically call that out. And leadership should be authentically calling that out and admitting sort of that shortcoming. And then oftentimes trying to articulate, even if it's a aspirational value, so it doesn't, like, people are like, yeah, we're not really like that. You're like, yeah, that's right, that's aspirational. But then you kind of point people in the direction of that, and then make sure that all of your activities, as well as the people you're bringing in, are aligning with that.
Thank you so much. Thank you three so much, and thank you audience so much. This is my stream here that I'm trying to work with. You were very active in asking questions. I thank you for that, and I wish you all great connection over lunch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.